Hello to all you movie barfs, and welcome back to the channel. After several botched attempts at making Spider-Man work, Sony decided to shift gears and place their bets on another wall crawler with Venom. The bar was already set pretty low for the character after the absolute travesty that was in Raimi's Spider-Man 3. You could only go up from there, that's for sure. And with the casting of fan favorite Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock, the movie looked pretty promising. But Sony had to take some creative departures from its comic book origins, mainly due to the fact that Spider-Man would be absent in this one, as there was already a version in the MCU under Disney. The movie was fairly entertaining at times, but overall, it was just okay. It wasn't a bold choice like the first Deadpool movie, although it could have been, and after a while, it faded away into obscurity, joining the ranks of other forgettable, average comic book movies. Let's take a look at why. But before that, here's your spoiler warning if you haven't seen it yet. The film wastes no time introducing the symbiotes, opening with a crash landing of a space aircraft from the Life Foundation, a company that does some research outside of Earth. Anyway, the aircraft contains the symbiotes encased in these capsules, which are being transported back to the company. Looks good so far. Showing the symbiotes coming from space research is a lot better written than the lazy writing of a random meteorite conveniently landing where Peter and MJ were having their date in Spider-Man 3. One of the symbiotes, which escaped containment earlier, manages to bond with a medical worker and slips away from the scene. The movie then shifts to introduce our protagonist, Eddie Brock. He is a reporter of some kind engaged to his fiancée. Now she happens to be involved in some legal work involving the Life Foundation, and the night before an interview, Eddie notices an email with legal documents regarding wrongful death claims involving the company. During his interview with the head of the company, Carlton Drake, in a moment of arrogance and stupidity, Eddie decides to expose him on camera regarding the accusations against his company. He gets shut down, but not before dropping names from the case his fiancée is involved in. Eddie's boss at the news company catches wind of this and confronts him about it, asking him who's his source. Trying to protect his fiancée, Eddie just shrugs and says he didn't have a source, and that he was just acting on a hunch. See, this is a weak character moment if you ask me. Being a reporter, Eddie would have known better than to use confidential documents for an accusation. And to make it worse, he just claims it was a hunch and backs off after mucking things up. So Eddie gets fired, but it's not only him, but his fiancée also gets fired for this mistake. I mean, what did he think was gonna happen? Surely he would have known that they'd be able to track the source of the leak. In the words of Eddie's boss, this guy really is a dumbass. And I guess the saying, "have a nice life," must be really trending in this universe as both Drake and Eddie's boss say it before dismissing him. Then we get a time jump of 6 months, which kinda ruins the pacing of the movie. And speaking of pacing, the symbiote at the start of the movie is still roaming around in the body of another host. Has it just been aimlessly wandering for 6 long months? I have no idea. Anyway, Eddie is jobless and struggling to make ends meet. After a night out at the bar, we're shown a side of his character that makes the audience care for him. Eddie has a save the cat moment, where he gives money to a homeless woman despite being financially constrained himself. So with this, it looks like the filmmakers are making Eddie out to be a hero. Eddie's always been more of an anti-hero in the comics, with his rivalry with Spider-Man being one of the triggers that brings out his personality. Making him a straight-up good guy is okay in the context of this film, but in my opinion, he works best as someone who's teetering more on the bad side. Meanwhile, things aren't going well at the Life Foundation, where Drake is experimenting on humans with the symbiotes. He has a speech with a subject named Isaac on God abandoning humans, and then he concludes that this time he will not abandon humankind. So does he have some kind of God complex? Because this isn't developed or expanded upon later. This is literally the first and last time we see this concept. And it's kinda disturbing that we have a room full of scientists, and all of them are as cold-blooded as Drake, just standing by as they watch the symbiotes kill their test subjects. Really, none of them would feel the least bit disturbed by this. No? Alright. As for the symbiotes, how do they deem what is a suitable host or not? Because the one at the start seemed to have no preference. taking the body of an old frail woman and that of a young girl. Even later in the film, Venom doesn't mind using a dog. Instead of killing the host, why not just use the host to go into Venom mode and break free from captivity? It can always just shed its host later and find a more suitable one. That sure beats dying from suffocation. But whatever. For the sake of exposition, we have the plot hole of the symbiotes killing their hosts and choosing to remain in captivity. One of the scientists grows a conscience and decides to enlist Eddie to expose their experiments. Eddie tells her to go to the cops, but then I'm wondering, why didn't you yourself go to the cops? Instead of moping around for 6 months, you had the legal documents proving it, and you had nothing left to lose after being fired. Another dumbass moment, perhaps. So, she lets Eddie into the compound to gather evidence, and in the process, he gets bonded with Venom. And after a series of events, Drake finds out that Eddie has the symbiote and sends a squad of goons to capture him. After a long and extended drone motorbike chase sequence that overstays its welcome, like seriously, they could have shaved off a few minutes off this scene, we finally get our first full look at Venom, all fleshed out from head to toe. I like that they made him about 8 feet tall, which makes for a more imposing feel. He also has a wet appearance on his skin, which makes for a more alienish look as well, and his eyes change in size and shape to be more expressive. But what's notably different from his comic book appearance is the absence of a spider emblem on his chest. Venom is a character that has his origins with Spider-Man, and works best as an anti-hero alongside him. In the source material, Spider-Man first bonds with the symbiote, and it enhances his spider powers. But he ultimately rejects the symbiotes because it was taking him down a dark path. The symbiote then finds Eddie Brock, and they find themselves to be a perfect pair due to their common hatred of Spider-Man. That's where Venom gets his white spider emblem from, as well as the triangular-shaped eyes resembling those of Spider-Man's mask. Both are reminiscent of Spider-Man's outfit and originate from the time he was first bonded with the symbiote. But since Spider-Man isn't in this universe, Venom just has a plain black chest, and from the way things are going now, it's unlikely that this version of Venom will clash with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, although that would be way more entertaining than Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman. Also, because Eddie Brock is a main character here, as opposed to being a supporting one in a Spider-Man story, the filmmakers introduced the symbiote as a character. Yeah, the symbiote itself has a personality that can actually talk to Eddie, either through his head or verbally, and it does work out. The banter between Eddie and the symbiote makes for one of the best aspects of the movie. It sure beats the annoying suit AI that Spider-Man had in Homecoming. So anyway, Venom brings Eddie aside and basically takes him hostage, telling him the plan for Carlton Drake's rocket and that he has to cooperate if he wants to survive. Alright, so Eddie has no choice in the matter with the symbiote threatening his life. Well, not quite, as a few scenes later, Eddie is seen to be deviating from Venom's plan and still trying to expose Drake instead of going to the rocket. And Venom still helps him for some unknown reason. I guess the writers needed to draw out the film a bit more. But what's even more puzzling is why would Venom need to negotiate with Eddie in the first place? As we've seen with the symbiote at the start of the film, they can completely take control of their host and reduce them to puppets. And we even saw this earlier in the film, when Venom took control of Eddie to fight off Drake's goons against his will. But now, Eddie seems to be the one in control, telling the symbiote what it can or cannot do. It's just inconsistent for the film to set something up a certain way and then totally neglect it later. But moving on. After a kick-ass action scene where Eddie is fine with Venom beating a policeman to death, but not eating them, Eddie is separated from Venom at the hospital after he discovers that the symbiote has literally been eating him alive. Eddie then gets captured by Drake, but is rescued by Venom, who's now taken his fiancée as a temporary host. And then at this moment we have the only character arc in the movie. Venom has had a change of heart and now wishes to stay on Earth instead of destroying it. Seriously? This is the only character in the entire movie that has any development. Even the main character, Eddie himself, ends the movie in the same way he starts off. But Venom's character development is so poorly executed that it's laughable. We don't even get to see it on screen, for crying out loud. It happens off screen, and we only know about it because he says it. He has a change of heart because of Eddie. Something about them being losers together. Yeah, It's pretty bad and hard not to get embarrassed watching it. Oh, and did I mention, the symbiote that has been traveling for 6 months was actually the leader and has now bonded with Drake, who's attempting to fly to space to bring back an invasion of millions of symbiotes. Honestly, that doesn't really sound like a serious threat. Just play out some high-pitched tunes on your phone and you're good. In the typical climactic fight at the end, Venom destroys the rocket and dies in the process. The sad piano music plays, but there's no time to grieve because in the very next scene, we find out that Venom is still alive and well inside Eddie. How did he survive? The answer? No idea. So, at the end of the film, Venom is somehow back and still inside Eddie. And what is absolutely ridiculous is that Eddie is now perfectly fine with the idea of Venom just sticking around. They even have a conversation on some ground rules as to who Venom can or cannot eat. I mean, come on. Really? You're now friends with the alien that threatened to kill you earlier and was literally eating away at your organs just because the threat of Drake's been dealt with? You have no benefit of being bonded with the symbiote. Even at the end of the film, Venom was saying that Eddie's liver looked good and juicy. Now, why would you want to be permanently bonded to a Hannibal Lecter? Not to mention, you'll never have another moment of privacy as this thing is with you 24/7. Plus, you have the added chore of having to feed it. So, now you gotta kill someone every now and then. This Eddie and Venom partnership was entertaining at first, but it becomes a bit silly when you think about it. In the comics, Eddie's primary motivation for keeping the symbiote was because it empowered him to take revenge on Spider-Man. Or in other storylines, Eddie has some sickness and the symbiote helped to keep it at bay and prolong his life. But we don't have any such motivation explored here. This film could have really benefited by giving a more convincing reason for Eddie to accept the symbiote sticking around. Overall, Venom was a pretty average movie, but it could have been so much more. The Eddie Brock in this movie just doesn't have much depth, compared to the anti-hero Eddie Brock from the comics, who wrestles with his good and evil side. Tom Hardy's charisma, however, carries the film and is one of its redeemable qualities. The film still passes on the entertainment factor, especially in the scenes where Eddie makes a fool of himself in public or the back and forth conversations between him and Venom. And Venom's movements and action scenes were on point here. He would totally crush Tom Holland's Spider-Man if they ever met. I just hope that in the next installment, the characters will be given the depth and complexity that they deserve. So, what do you think? Share your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our other videos too.